the sound of church bells at 9 in the morning, echoing through old maple trees, signaling a quiet Sunday morning. In small Ohio towns, in 1957, you didn't need a watch to know when summer was ending. At that time, over 60 million Americans lived in suburbs, more than the entire population of New York City and Chicago. Do you remember the smell of starch on a crisp new white shirt? That stiff feeling signaling school was almost here. This is a story about the mornings, the dinners, and the final moments of freedom before the school bell rang. Let us travel back to that morning, as the golden sunlight began to stretch across the red brick paved streets. The morning began with the clink of glass milk bottles on the porch, a sound that has now vanished forever. In the small kitchen, the scent of percolated coffee mingled with frying bacon, waking the family for church service. Your father sat at the table, leafing through a thick Sunday dispatch, while mother busied herself preparing a hot breakfast. Midwest homes back then often had wide porches, where neighbors could wave to one another as the day began. Imagine this. In 1957, there were over 40,000 small grocery stores, more than all the post offices today. Do you remember sliding your feet into new Buster Brown leather shoes, stiff and shiny, reserved only for Sunday? Neighborhood children gathered on the corner, dressed in their best clothes, but still thinking of their unfinished summer games. The living room radio played soft melodies, mixed with weather reports for a hot late August afternoon in the heartland. Everyone piled into the car. Shiny Chevrolets or Fords without air conditioning. Windows rolled down to catch the breeze. The engine roared to life in the stillness, light blue smoke vanishing quickly into the fresh air of the countryside. Crowds headed to the central church, where wide-brimmed hats and striped ties filled the rows of wooden pews. The red brick sanctuary stood tall, the heart of a community where people truly knew each other by name. Inside, the air was cool and smelled of old wood, with the rustling sound of hymnals being opened in unison. The old minister's words echoed, but the children stared out the window, watching the sunlight dance on the grass. After the service, people lingered on the lawn, exchanging stories about the corn harvest or getting ready for school. It was the rhythm of an era where connection was not on screens, but in the firm grip of handshakes. As the sun reached its peak, the aroma from ovens across town began to drift through every single street. Sunday lunch was always the biggest meal of the week, featuring fried chicken or a savory pot roast dinner. Do you remember the clinking of silverware against porcelain plates? And the lively chatter around the heavy wooden table? The room was filled with the hazy golden light of the last summer noon, feeling full and slightly nostalgic. In 1957, over 90% of American families ate lunch together every single Sunday of the year. After the meal, men often moved to the porch to rest, smoking pipes and discussing politics or local sports. Meanwhile, children were finally allowed to shed their formal clothes and change into worn-out jeans and simple t-shirts. A normal day in Ohio that year could reach 95 degrees, yet almost nobody had air conditioning at home. Do you remember standing in front of a big metal fan, mouth wide open to hear your voice sound mechanical? Main Street on a Sunday afternoon was usually deserted, with shops closed to allow everyone a day of rest. Only the Rexall drugstore remained open, where you could buy a cold soda fountain drink for just 10 cents. Imagine, the area of this entire business district was smaller than a single modern shopping mall in Houston, Texas. To a child, that Main Street was a vibrant world filled with colorful neon signs and the smell of candy. Do you remember the jingle of the bell as you pushed the door open? A familiar welcome from the owner. Summer in Ohio meant long walks to the riverbank, where the murky water was the perfect place to cool down. Boys carried homemade fishing poles from tree branches, dreaming of catching a big one for the family's dinner table. The drone of cicadas buzzed through the thickets, creating the never-ending background music of a Midwest childhood. There was a strange freedom when you could play outside all day without any adult supervision at all. As long as you were back home when the streetlights flickered on, everything was considered safe and fine. In the 1950s, The crime rate in these towns was lower than in a single large modern airport. Do you remember lying on the grass, watching the clouds drift by, and guessing what shapes they were forming? Those were the moments when time seemed to stand still before the school day worries arrived tomorrow morning. Late afternoon, corn trucks rumbled through town, leaving behind clouds of dust and the scent of red earth. The scent of dry hay from distant fields drifted into bedrooms, reminding everyone of the upcoming bountiful harvest. At the drive-in theaters, workers were beginning to prepare for the romantic Sunday night movie screenings under stars. There were over 4,000 drive-ins across America that year, more than all the indoor theaters in California today. Do you remember the excitement of sitting in the car, eating popcorn, and watching movies under the starlit sky? But before it got dark, there were still final chores to be finished, to prepare for the new week. Your mother was ironing school uniforms, steam rising from the heavy iron onto the freshly washed cotton fabric. The rhythmic clicking of an old Singer sewing machine echoed from the next room as buttons were being secured. For many, the sounds of household chores were a symbol of quiet care and a mother's unspoken love. The 1950s were a time of stability, where every object in the house had its own proper place. Do you remember the heavy black rotary phone with its spinning dial and a ring that echoed through rooms? It was a time when communication was a luxury and every phone call held a sense of real importance. Back then, over 70% of phone calls were on party lines shared with your very own neighbors. As the sun began to set, the town put on a brilliant orange coat that felt truly magical. Shadows lengthened across the lawns, and the air began to cool after a very long and sweltering day. Do you remember the scent of the backyard roses as the evening dew began to settle on every petal? Your father started watering the lawn, the sprinkler spinning to create tiny rainbows in the fading light of day. The sound of water whispering on the leaves was the most peaceful sound, signaling that rest was finally near. Neighbors took strolls after dinner, stopping at garden gates to ask about plans for the coming school day. There was a natural bond where every house was not a completely isolated island from the rest of town. Remember, in 1957, over 80% of Americans knew the names of at least 5 neighbors. It was an informal safety net, protecting your childhood throughout all of those formative and peaceful years. Inside, the television was turned on, blurry black and white images appearing on a tiny cathode ray screen. The family gathered on the sofa, waiting for the Ed Sullivan Show with its exciting and brand new performances. Do you remember the thrill of seeing performers from New York appearing right there in your very own living room? A television back then was not just a device. It was a window to the vast world outside. But above all, this was the very last evening you didn't have to worry about school assignments. The feeling of freedom was ending, replaced by a quiet and strange sense of anticipation for tomorrow. You pulled out your new school bag, checking the boxes of crayons that smelled of fresh wax and wood. Over 5 million boxes of crayons were sold each back-to-school season across the United States back then. Do you remember the smell of a brand new notebook with no writing yet, promising a completely fresh start? Your mother called from downstairs, reminding you to wake up early tomorrow so you wouldn't miss the bus. Those lemon yellow school buses began to appear in your mind, carrying all of your old and dear friends. You climbed into bed, the sheets smelling of the afternoon sun and freshly laundered by your mother's hands. Outside, the sound of crickets began to replace the cicadas, a clear sign of the coming change in seasons. The town fell asleep, but the memories of a brilliant summer would stay in your heart forever. In small Midwest towns, Sunday was the day to recharge the soul for an entire close-knit community. A normal day ended, but it was part of a sequence of days that shaped who you are today. Do you remember the feeling of absolute security, knowing your parents were right there in the very next room? That was the most precious gift of a 1950s childhood. A sense of peace and total trust. Things have vanished forever, but if you listen closely, that bell is still echoing somewhere in the distance. Close your eyes and let the breath of that evening lead you back to your old family home. Evenings at home back then had no phone notifications, only the gentle sound of pages turning in a book. Your father might be checking his gardening tools, preparing to put them away as the summer finally ends. Your mother sat knitting, the wooden needles clicking together to create a rhythmic and steady sound in the room. The silence in the house was not scary. It brought a sense of complete and total belonging instead. Do you remember the smell of polished wood and a hint of candle wax in the evening air? There were fewer than 10 television channels to choose from, but that meant everyone watched the same things. That close community created a sense of safety that the modern world has sometimes forgotten in its rush. Imagine, the percentage of Americans participating in local civic clubs was 3 times higher than it is today. Do you remember your parents' laughter drifting up from the living room while you lay in your bunk bed? Simple habits like playing bridge or listening to the radio shaped the very soul of an entire generation. There was no rush of emails or texts, only the slow and steady rhythm of the wall clock. That ticking was the heartbeat of the home, promising that everything was exactly where it should always be. Do you remember the slight chill of the very first autumn breeze blowing through the open bedroom window? It signaled that the wandering days of summer were truly closing to make way for a new season. But in your memories, that evening remains forever warm and filled with a deep sense of protection. Everything was simple, yet that very simplicity is the thing we find ourselves searching for so often now. When the last light in the house went out, that small Ohio town became absolutely and perfectly still. Today, you can still find those red brick streets in a few of the older, preserved towns. The ancient maple trees still stand there, having witnessed dozens of back-to-school seasons pass by very quietly. But your generation are the last ones carrying the vivid, living memories of 1957 in hearts. These memories are not just the past, they are the foundation for the very best things in life. Why do small things like the smell of starch or the clink of milk bottles matter so much? Because they remind us of a time when the world seemed small, manageable, and fundamentally safe for everyone, where a person's worth was measured by their simple kindness toward the people living right around them. Though time marches on, the values of that Sunday in 1957 remain completely and perfectly intact. You may never be able to return to that house, but that house still lives inside of you. The sound of church bells at 9, the smell of fresh-cut grass on a warm and sunny Saturday. Those things are no longer in most neighborhoods, but the memories themselves will never ever be lost. If you close your eyes long enough, you can still hear the laughter of that long ago summer.